when you go into like expanding, say you're expanding to Europe, I think, let's make the assumption that most people will be listening to this, selling in the US, expanding to Europe, not necessarily, but potentially, because US is less regulated than Europe, so that's the more difficult one. Would you do all these checks for every marketplace? Would you pick like the big ones? Like when you advise clients, what do you say? Do you say UK, Germany, or do you say just go for it all and do all the checks?
So despite the fact that the UK have split from the European Union, we still currently share, in the main, the same regulations. So if we just use expanding as an example of the process, we're checking the regulation. We're not checking the marketplaces individually, because all they do is they take their information from the regulators. So we're checking against European regulations as being at a very high level. So what is the mandatory requirement across the whole of the region? If we hit that, then we know that we can stand up to a marketplace or a regulator and fight the corner of the brand. So we know that, providing that the advice has been adhered to, that this product is guaranteed to be compliant. Then what we look at is various marketplaces, typically the biggest ones in Europe and each individual country, and then we look at any nuances that they've got. Some, for instance, Amazon have got some slightly different requirements on like safer upper limits of ingredients in food supplements, as an example. Because it's borderline maybe in the countries, they've brought it down to make sure that they're not going to cause any problems. Now, from a regulatory perspective, you can argue that's not right, but that's Amazon's rule. So therefore, what we're doing is we're advising on, what nuances, depending on where you choose to sell, what's going to be different. Secondary to that are country differences. So some countries within Europe have started to peel off of the main regulation. This is very common. This is where the changes come. So it's almost starting to not make their own rules, but interpret a regulation slightly differently, which means that if a brand is adamant that they want to sell in Austria, as an example, then maybe that would be different to what we'd deem as mainland Europe, your Germany, France, and Netherlands from the sales perspective, the bigger regions. So it's really understanding the brand, understanding where they want to sell, what their aspirations are for the future, and then building them out a compliant packaging piece on that. And then there is secondary to that, there's the packaging regulation, which if anybody has even considered selling in Europe or selling already would have experienced EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, which is a packaging regulation. I won't go into the weeds about it because I've probably fallen asleep myself, but this is a subject which is a very hot topic in Europe at the moment, and each individual country has its own requirements. So when you're looking to sell in Europe, being specific about country and your roadmap for which country to move into is really important to make sure that you're adhering to those regulations at all times.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked too deep into EPR, to be honest, but I know a lot of brands that we work with do it. So for me, that makes a lot of sense that somebody should talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about, or as soon as possible to get their packaging just designed so it fits everything as easily as possible. Because otherwise you have to redo your packaging in order to sell it, because they care about recyclability, whether they recycle it or not. And it's too much regulation first, potentially, but I'm not involved in that, so all good.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, considering everyone's getting poorer in Europe, then they should just be trying to make people buy more stuff. Anyway, so how does someone assess risks? So they're thinking, okay, I might want to expand overseas. Can you talk me through just like simple process, like what they should do first, second, third? You can even shout yourself out in like where they should use you, or what they should do in what order to make it work. Because they're going to need other people. They can't do it all themselves. Don't just trust Claude.
Absolutely, definitely don't do that. It certainly has its place, of course, as is every piece of AI. But yeah, definitely don't use that as a entirely true source of information. But so assessing risks. So there's really only, we've touched on them throughout this, there's really only two core pieces to fully understand whether your product and your business should and can trade overseas. They're both compliance related. The first one is the product compliance. So once you've identified that your product can be sold, You then need to make sure that the product packaging is compliant. That's the integral bit, because that will just stop everything in its tracks if it's not. So that is really critical. So identifying whether your packaging is compliant, how it's presented to the market and the consumer, how the information is laid out, and whether it's appropriate for UK and European sale. Once you've had somebody review your packaging and given you advice on whether it is, then that is like number one, because you know then that despite the other pieces that come with the other logistical pieces and all of that, your product is going to be safe to put to market. You then need off the back of that what's called a responsible person, which is the representation. So those two pieces run in parallel with each other. So compliant packaging and responsible person, you'll need that in order to trade. Whether
So what's a responsible person, technically? Sorry.
So no, not at all. So a responsible person is representation within region for the compliance of your product. Typically, that is the person who's carried out the compliance. So typically they're the same person. However, in most cases, if you have an operation in where you're looking to trade, for instance, if you have an operation already, a company registered in Germany, in most cases, for most products, you can represent yourself for that. Most brands who are starting to trade overseas don't go down that route, nor would I recommend it short term. That's a journey you'll be on for your roadmap. So compliance, responsible person, those two pieces in parallel make up the product compliance element of your trade. The next risk is your VAT, so your tax. So for those in the US, obviously tax is super familiar to you. In Europe, it's called VAT. Same thing, just we charge it before rather than after. So having your business compliant is the most critical bit as well, because you won't be able to import product without that. Now, for those who are looking to expand over to Europe, you don't need to register a business anywhere. It's not required. You can use your US, Canadian, Chinese, Indian entity, it doesn't matter, to register for VAT in those regions. And then you'll need it for everywhere where you store product. That's the critical piece. So the misconception is that you need VAT in any country where you're selling product. That's incorrect. Just where you're storing product. And there's lots of other VAT opportunities without having to hold multiple VAT numbers. So those two pieces, your product compliance and your VAT, remove an extremely large portion, 90% of the risk involved with it, because it allows you to ship product, it allows you to import product compliantly, and it allows you to sell product compliantly over any platform you like, whether that's a marketplace, retail, distributor, whatever. That it covers that whole piece in one.
Okay, great. So we've got packaging, info, responsible person, VAT. And then, how do you fit into this? How does Expandly fit into this, and what services can you provide around this?
Yeah, sure. So Expandly have what we call expansion pathway. Now, the expansion pathway is sort of everything we spoke about into one journey. So essentially what Expandly do is we support with the feasibility and setup of product to get you fully onboarded and ready to trade. So all the pieces we spoke about. But we don't stop there. We then support you with the ongoing pathway of your journey. So we will then look at what marketplaces are best for your product, what regions are best after the UK and maybe Germany, what other countries are appropriate. We have the software supports with that as well. So we have our proprietary software which helps. So even though the terminology I really don't like, one-stop shop, I'm not too keen on that whatsoever. However, it's probably the best way without me showing you an illustration and the listeners to understand what we do. So essentially, Marketplace Accelerator helps you to start and continue to be successful in region.
Cool. And you do VAT as well? VAT
we
compliance?
do, yep. So the individual services, John, just to recap, yes, so product compliance, VAT, logistics, we help with shipping and customs. We have warehouses in UK, Europe and US, so we have that sort of network of 3PLs, and then our software which supports with the listings piece as well. So.
Love it. Cool. Anything else I should be asking about your service and how you work with people? I
could spend a lot of time on it telling you about expanding. I'm very conscious that if people would love to find out more, I'll be delighted to have a chat with them. But yeah, essentially any questions or concerns you've got over your current position or one you have, we offer free consultation So feel free to get in touch. There's no obligation to that. I'll be delighted to help.
What's a success story then? Like someone who's doing X amount in the US and wanted to come to Europe. Like, what's a realistic, if you're supposed to say, someone say, well, how much more money am I going to make? What's a realistic percentage of their US sales that someone might expect to make as long as this piece of string, in the UK and Germany?
Well, the end goal is to double your sales. So if we take the US as an example, the opportunity that presents itself in Europe is as good as, if not slightly better, in terms of number of population and buyers than the US. So we say you can double your sales. Now, of course, that's very ambitious target because it takes a long time to get there, as any brand owner will know when they started from zero to be in a 10, 20, 30 million pound business in their domestic country. They know that how long that journey takes. So I think people have got to understand that you are almost starting again.
Yeah.
Albeit you've got, you'll be able to pull your reviews over and you're going to get a little bump in head start. And of course you've got the knowledge, but quite frankly, you're starting a new business. So what we do say, if you're looking at just starting with something like just starting with the UK, then within your first 24 months, you can expect a 10% increase. When you start going over to Germany and France, which are the two biggest, depending on product category. So this is quite broad brush, John, by the way. But yeah, the biggest markets within Europe. Within 2 years, you can expect at least a 30% increase on domestic sales. And then, of course, the further on that goes, depending, providing you put there's enough resource, time, energy, money, and you nail down your logistical network, then absolutely within 5 to 8 years, you can expect to double your sales. Some quicker, some longer.
Nice. So we'll move on to the next part then, our controversial take. So here's where I ask you about your controversial or debatable opinion in the Amazon space. Like, what would you say if I had to ask you for a controversial opinion in the Amazon or e-commerce space?
Well, this is not terribly controversial, but it's something which I hear all the time because of what's gone on in the world over the past with shipping from a domestic country into another country. Is should I sell internationally? Or should I expand internationally? A lot of people say, well, look, I'll just sell my product from the US and I'll ship it direct into a seller in the UK, or I'll sell it direct into a seller in Germany. And in fact, a lot of the times they've done that. People have gone onto their site, their friends have come over from the US and they've tried a product and they love it, and then they buy it from the US, and it gives them some sales and some interest in the region. And I think, well, why shouldn't I just continue to do this, and why can't I continue to do this? I mean, short of some of the legislation that's come out recently with the de minimis rule and all of that jazz, stripping that piece aside, people think that is the opportunity, and that's what they should continue doing in order to, grow their sales channels. However, it's very, very, in fact, it's the polar opposite between expanding internationally and storing product domestically than it is to store product in another country and keep shipping D2C. Like they're entirely different, and they couldn't be further apart from an opportunity perspective. So if you're serious about expanding your brand into another country, then absolutely store product locally. Store it in region. Don't debate on that point, and find a way to resolve it through some of the bits we spoke about.
I would agree. So. Not very controversial, I'm sorry, Drew.
No, I know. Well, it's funny because, and they're not so much in the Amazon world actually, John, but in I've been to a few D2C events of late, and particularly ones surrounding like TikTok Shop and like Shein and stuff like that. And of course, their view on it typically is that it's a good move doing that. So therefore, when they're in the movement, I mean, obviously, let's say now, I know they're all working very, very hard to for their sellers to store product domestically. But typically, they're like, well, that's a good move. Let's just ship a load of stuff overseas. Put 300 different sellers' stuff into a container, ship it into Germany, and then we'll distribute it when it gets there 2 weeks later or 10 days later.
Yeah, well, that's price over shopping experience. Yeah.
Yes, well, of course, and absolutely right. There is a lot more to unravel with this, but I think the sort of point I was getting to was trying to encourage them to say, well, look, your product would do really well. Yeah, okay, you might have to increase your price slightly, and you might even have to reduce your margin, whatever. But you've got a huge opportunity here for this particular product. But
I agree.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it's like they have been pushing a lot, these platforms of like, price over everything, over quality and speed and all that kind of stuff. And it's all us that we care too much about quality. It's all about Gen Z, just get it as fast as possible, doesn't matter. If you're Gen Z, you're not supposed to be offended by this episode. Okay, thank you so much, Drew, for being here. If people want to reach out to
Thank you so
you,
much.
book in with you, book in a session, and understand what the opportunities are, what's the best way to do that?
Best way is for Drew at expandly.com. Reach out and then we'll have a chat and I'll give you some advice.
Perfect. So expandly.com, and Drew is DREW.
It is.
Awesome. No, just so everyone confirmed, because they can't see this. All right, so thank you so much for listening, Drew. Thank you so much for being here. Everyone that's watched this, please do feel free to rate feedback on the episode. It helps us go further. And if you're watching an extract, you won't see this bit anyway. So awesome. Thanks so much, Drew, and see you again soon.